Before law, before justice, before redemption, there was only survival. This is Frontier Chronicles, where untold Western tales are carved in dust, lead, and silence. If this story grabs your soul, show you're not just passing through. Hit that like button and ride with us into legend. The bullet shattered the sheriff's badge, pinned to Michael Wayne's chest, sending him crashing through the saloon window in an explosion of glass and blood. Outside on Main Street, the Dawson gang laughed as they reloaded their weapons. "Look at that," shouted their leader. The great John Wayne's boy can't even dodge a warning shot. In Red Creek, Colorado, carrying the Wayne name was both a blessing and a curse. For 30 years, John Wayne had been the law in these parts, the fastest gun, the fairest judge, the man who never backed down from a fight. But now his son Michael was about to learn the hardest lesson of all. Inheriting a legend is easy, but earning it costs everything. What happened next would prove that some legacies are written in lead, and some names are earned one bullet at a time. But to understand how a father's greatest triumph became his son's deepest burden, we have to go back to the day John Wayne made the most difficult decision of his career. What you're about to witness is the true account of how a legendary lawman faced his greatest challenge. Not outlaws or gunfighters, but his own flesh and blood. This is a story about legacy, about the weight of expectations, and about what happens when a name becomes both armor and target. Michael Wayne was 25 years old and had spent his entire life trying to escape his father's shadow. While other young men in Red Creek dreamed of becoming sheriffs, Michael had different plans. He wanted to be a businessman, maybe run a general store, live a quiet life where people knew him as Michael, not John Wayne's boy. But fate, as it often does in the West, had other plans. The trouble started when John Wayne announced his retirement. After 3 decades of keeping the peace in Red Creek, his arthritis was getting worse. His eyes weren't as sharp as they used to be, and he'd promised his late wife that he'd hang up his guns before they hung him. The town council gathered to discuss his replacement, and that's when John Wayne made the announcement that changed everything. "My son Michael will be taking over as sheriff," he declared, his voice carrying that familiar authority that had settled disputes and ended arguments for 30 years. The room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at Michael, who stood frozen in the back, his face pale as winter snow. Now here's what you have to understand about small frontier towns. They don't just elect sheriffs based on qualifications. They choose them based on bloodline, on reputation, on the kind of respect that gets passed down like heirloom jewelry. And in Red Creek, there was no name more respected than Wayne. But respect isn't something you inherit. It's something you earn. And Michael Wayne was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The next morning, John Wayne pinned his badge on Michael's chest in front of the whole town. The silver star caught the sunlight like a mirror, and for a moment, Michael felt the weight of every eye watching him. This wasn't just a badge. It was 30 years of his father's reputation, condensed into a piece of metal that suddenly felt heavier than an anvil. "Son," John Wayne said quietly, so only Michael could hear, "this badge doesn't make you sheriff. Your actions do. Remember that." But the townspeople had already made up their minds. To them, Michael wasn't just the new sheriff. He was John Wayne's legacy, the continuation of an era they desperately wanted to preserve. They expected him to be exactly like his father, fearless, decisive, faster than lightning with a gun. The problem was, Michael had never wanted to be a gunfighter. He'd never practiced quick draws or studied the art of intimidation. While his father was teaching other young men how to face down outlaws, Michael was reading books about commerce and dreaming of a life where problems were solved with words, not bullets. That first week as sheriff was a revelation in humiliation. When drunk cowboys tested his authority, Michael tried to reason with them instead of laying down the law. When disputes arose between merchants, he spent hours trying to negotiate compromises that satisfied nobody. And when the local toughs started making jokes about the sheriff who never draws his gun, Michael felt something he'd never experienced before: shame in his own name. But John Wayne watched all of this with the patient eyes of a man who understood that legends aren't born. They're forged in the fire of necessity. "You're trying too hard to be different from me," he told Michael one evening as they sat on the porch of the sheriff's office. "Stop fighting who you are and start figuring out who you need to be." "I don't want to be a killer, Pa," Michael replied. "I've seen what this job did to you. The nightmares, the guilt, the way you jump every time a door slams. I want a different life." John Wayne nodded slowly. "I understand, son, but sometimes life doesn't give us the choice. Sometimes we have to become what our people need us to be." Those words would prove prophetic sooner than either of them expected. 3 weeks into Michael's tenure as sheriff, the Dawson gang rode into Red Creek like a plague on horseback. Led by Jake Dawson, a vicious outlaw with a personal grudge against the Wayne family, they'd come not just to rob the bank, but to settle an old score. Jake Dawson's brother had been killed by John Wayne 15 years earlier during a bank robbery in Dodge City. It was a clean shooting, self-defense in front of witnesses, but Jake had spent every day since then planning his revenge. And now that the great John Wayne was no longer wearing a badge, Jake saw his opportunity. "I hear old man Wayne's retired," Jake announced as he and his 5 men dismounted in front of the saloon. "Heard he passed his badge to his boy. Well, I reckon it's time to see if the apple fell far from the tree." The word spread through town like wildfire. Jake Dawson was back, and he was calling out the new sheriff. Michael heard the news while he was having lunch at Ma Henderson's cafe. His hands started shaking so badly he couldn't hold his coffee cup. This was what he'd been dreading, the moment when wearing his father's badge would put him in mortal danger. He found John Wayne in the stable, brushing down his old horse. "Pa," Michael said, his voice barely above a whisper, "Jake Dawson's in town. He's asking for me." John Wayne stopped brushing and turned to face his son. In that moment, Michael saw something in his father's eyes he'd never seen before. Fear, not for himself, but for his boy. "I know, son, I heard. What do I do? I'm not ready for this. I'm not you." John Wayne set down the brush and placed both hands on Michael's shoulders. "No, you're not me, and that might be exactly what this town needs." That night, John Wayne faced the most difficult decision of his life. He could strap on his guns, walk down Main Street, and face Jake Dawson himself. One last gunfight to protect his son and preserve his legacy. He knew he could probably win. His hands might be slower, but his experience and tactical knowledge were unmatched. But doing so would destroy everything he'd tried to teach Michael about responsibility and courage. It would tell the whole town that Michael Wayne wasn't worthy of the badge, that blood meant nothing without the backbone to defend it. As he sat in his room cleaning his old Colt .45, John Wayne made a choice that would define both his legacy and his son's future. He would let Michael face this challenge alone, not out of cruelty, but out of love. Because sometimes the greatest gift a father can give his son is the chance to become his own man. But that didn't mean he wouldn't be watching from the shadows, ready to step in if things went terribly wrong. At high noon the next day, Main Street was empty except for 2 figures: Jake Dawson standing in front of the saloon, and Michael Wayne walking slowly from the sheriff's office, his hand resting uncertainly on his gun. "Well, well," Jake called out, his voice dripping with contempt. "If it isn't the famous John Wayne's boy, you know why I'm here, kid?" "I know," Michael replied, surprised by how steady his own voice sounded. "You want revenge for your brother." "That's right. Your daddy killed my kin in cold blood 15 years ago. Now I'm gonna return the favor." This is where the story takes its most crucial turn, because what Michael Wayne did next surprised everyone, including himself. Instead of going for his gun, he spoke. "Your brother was robbing a bank, Mr. Dawson. He'd already shot 2 innocent people. My father gave him every chance to surrender." Jake's face twisted with rage. "You calling me a liar, boy? I'm calling you a man who spent 15 years nursing a grudge instead of learning the truth." The crowd gathered on the sidewalks, held their breath. This wasn't how gunfights were supposed to go. Where was the dramatic quick draw? Where was the violence everyone expected? Michael continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I've read the witness statements, Mr. Dawson. I've talked to people who were there. Your brother wasn't a victim, he was a killer. And if you draw that gun on me, you'll be just like him." For a moment, Jake Dawson hesitated. In that hesitation, Michael saw something he'd never expected: doubt. "But if you insist on this fight," Michael added, his hand finally moving to his gun, "then I'll give it to you. Because that's what wearing this badge means, protecting my town from men who choose violence over justice." The moment of truth. What happened next lasted only seconds but felt like hours. Jake Dawson, realizing that words weren't going to solve this, went for his gun. But as his hand closed around the grip, he made a fatal mistake. He underestimated John Wayne's son. Michael had never been the fastest draw in the West, but he'd inherited something more valuable than speed: his father's tactical mind. As Jake's gun cleared leather, Michael didn't try to outdraw him. Instead, he dove to his right, rolled behind a water trough, and came up, firing. His first shot took Jake in the shoulder, spinning him around. His second shot knocked the gun from Jake's hand, and his third shot, the one that ended the fight, was aimed at Jake's legs, dropping him to the ground, wounded but alive. The other members of the Dawson gang, seeing their leader defeated, threw down their weapons and surrendered. As the dust settled, Michael stood over Jake Dawson with his smoking gun still in his hand. The outlaw looked up at him with a mixture of pain and respect. You could have killed me," Jake gasped. "Yes," Michael replied, "but killing you wouldn't bring your brother back, and it wouldn't make this town any safer." That evening, as the Dawson gang was loaded into a wagon bound for the territorial prison, John Wayne found his son sitting on the porch of the sheriff's office. The badge on Michael's chest caught the setting sun, but now it looked different somehow, like it belonged there. "You did good today, son," John Wayne said, settling into the chair beside him. "I didn't do it like you would have," Michael replied. "No, you didn't. You did it better." Michael looked at his father in surprise. "Better?" John Wayne nodded. "I've killed 17 men in my career as a lawman, Michael. Some deserved it, some didn't, but all of them are dead because I couldn't find another way. Today, you found another way. You showed this town that the Wayne name doesn't just mean fast guns and hard justice. It means wisdom and mercy when they're needed most." As the stars came out over Red Creek, father and son sat in comfortable silence. The legacy had been passed, but not in the way anyone expected. Michael Wayne wasn't his father's clone. He was something new, something better adapted for a changing world. "Pa," Michael said finally, "I think I'm starting to understand why you chose me for this job." "Oh?" John Wayne smiled. "And why's that?" "Because you didn't need another John Wayne. You needed the first Michael Wayne." John Wayne's smile widened. "Now you're learning, son. Now you're learning." Michael Wayne served as sheriff of Red Creek for 27 years, becoming a legend in his own right. He never killed a man in the line of duty, but he solved more crimes and prevented more violence than any lawman in Colorado territory. His method became known as the Wayne Doctrine. Justice tempered with mercy, strength guided by wisdom. When he finally retired, he passed his badge not to his own son, but to the most qualified candidate, a former outlaw named Tom Bradley, who turned his life around under Michael's guidance. Because Michael Wayne had learned the most important lesson of all. True legacy isn't about family names or inherited expectations. It's about making the world a little better than you found it. And in the dusty streets of Red Creek, where the Wayne name still carries weight and respect, that lesson lives on. Not in the stories of quick draws and gunfights, but in the quiet heroism of a man who chose to be himself rather than the shadow of his father. Because sometimes the greatest honor you can give a legend is to prove that legends can evolve, that names can grow, and that the best legacies are the ones that inspire others to find their own path to greatness. This was the story of John Wayne's son. This was the story of a legacy reborn. This was the story of Michael Wayne, the sheriff who never needed to prove he was his father's son because he had the courage to prove he was his own man.